Hey everybody! So, I just wanted to film a quick video because I have had a lot of you contact me to ask about the Ted Bundy documentary. Of course, just kind of asking me my personal opinions on it because I'm really big into true crime and Ted Bundy has always been my favorite subject to research. So, I kind of figured that with as many of you as I have had asking me, it might be worth it just to shoot a quick little video so I can just kind of link you guys instead of continually typing it all out. To be clear, this is not because I don't love the opportunity to discuss it with you guys. I am totally stoked about that. And it's certainly not because I am some sort of like monster Ted Bundy expert by any means. But it is, Ted Bundy's case has definitely, cases, I guess one should say, definitely a big area of interest for me. Always has been. Which is why so many of you have asked me about it. So I guess really with the whole documentary, the first thing I'll say is absolutely it is worth the watch. It is done by Joe Berlinger? Probably not saying that correctly, but the same gentleman who is doing Extremely Wicked, the movie featuring Zac Efron. I think that for basically 4 hours, I thought it was very good. Here's the thing. Ted Bundy is not the kind of individual that, in my opinion, you can get sort of a end-all, be-all kind of story told on in 4 hours. It's just, there's too many layers, there's too much going on. I will say that, again, overall, totally worth the watch. I was a little disappointed given that it was called Conversations with a Serial Killer. I think it probably would have been more aptly named Conversations with People Who Knew a Serial Killer, plus a bonus of about 10 minutes of actual audio recordings from Ted Bundy himself, even though we have literally hundreds of hours of it. I felt like the way that it was advertised and promoted, I kind of got the impression that it was going to be a lot of like, you've never heard this before stuff directly from Ted Bundy. Now, of course, in my shoes, as a self-admitted Bundy-phile, I kind of had this attitude like, oh, okay, bet, watch, let's see. Because there's probably not a lot that has been publicly released that I have not heard from his confession tapes and his interviews and things like that. I definitely, the big thing that got me was I was just a little bit disappointed that there wasn't more actual audio from the Bundy tapes themselves. I think that overall, I thought it was very interesting and I thought it was well put together. There were a lot of little things that I was kind of surprised they didn't mention. And I'm sort of straddling the line here because I don't want to spoil it for people who don't know as much about Bundy and have not seen the documentary. There definitely, like I said, there were things I was a little surprised were not mentioned. Like obviously, I'm aware that Ann Rule has passed away and was not available for an interview per se, but I think that it's almost hard to mention Ted Bundy in a really oh, what's the word I'm looking for here? In a way that sort of is educational without mentioning Ann Rule. For anybody who is unaware, Ann Rule personally knew Ted Bundy and wrote The Stranger Beside Me, which in my opinion is probably one of the single best books I've read on the topic. And there's a lot of great ones out there. I'm not saying all of them, all the other ones are garbage or anything. But I thought that Ann Rule's book was incredibly unique and insanely impressive, really. So I was a little surprised that that wasn't even mentioned. Side note, if, and honestly, I don't care if you are a lifelong true crime addict or a lifelong Bundy fanatic or just kind of getting your toes wet in either true crime or Ted Bundy, definitely go check out that book by Ann Rule. It is amazing. I have heard excellent things about her other books too. I have not quite gotten around to reading them, but She's an amazing writer, and her perspective of the whole situation I thought was very unique and extremely balanced and very relatable in terms of this woman who was put into this very peculiar situation. Again, not about that spoiler life, even though it's basically history at this point, but still, good book. If you are at all interested, definitely check it out. I think it gives a very good, very different perspective than you'll find a lot of other places. So that was one thing. I was a little surprised that it wasn't even mentioned in the documentary, because I feel like over the course of 4 hours, maybe we could have thrown in a 2-minute section about it. I personally felt as though episode 2 of the documentary was kind of brutal for me personally. Mostly, and this is going to sound really bad, this is in no way intended to be disrespectful to anyone involved, but the fact is that I felt like the interview with Carol DaRonch, I think that we could have probably eased up on that a little bit. She had, while a very horrifying experience with Ted Bundy, it was very brief, and I think that I would have personally liked to have seen, and who knows, maybe they tried and maybe just nobody was willing to do an interview, which again, totally understand. I feel like if we were going to be interviewing survivors of Ted Bundy, I think that we could have probably spent a little bit less time on Carol DaRonch, just because, again, while horrifying, and I'm not minimizing that, her experience, it was very brief, and I felt that the whole, I won't say the whole, but the bulk of the talking that she did just felt extremely repetitive. And in all fairness, I'm not sure if that's because of the time I put into researching Ted Bundy, or if that's just literally face value what that was. So definitely, episode 2 was probably my least favorite of the 4. I will say, if you find yourself kind of stuck up at episode 2, like, God, we're really gonna just sit and listen to this abduction story again and again, it picks up the pace in terms of getting different information out there than that. So for me, because I'm gonna level with you, I literally almost didn't keep watching after episode 2, but trying to keep an open mind, I went ahead and forged on. It was worth it. But yeah, for me, because it's something I can see myself possibly even watching again, which is not something I commonly will say for documentaries, but in the future, for me personally, I will probably skip episode 2. Again, for me, just a lot of super repetitive information. I think that overall, though, I thought it was really good. I think that I guess the best way I could describe it is that it was a very good sort of introduction to Ted Bundy. By no means do I consider this an all-encompassing documentary. Certainly, there's a lot more information than anyone could fit into 4 hours. With the exception of the sort of redundant nature of episode 2, I think they did well at keeping it moving. The pace was nice. There was a lot of good information in there. One of the other things I was surprised, and it's possible that I missed it, but I don't recall at any point when they were discussing Linda Ann Healy. I was surprised that either they didn't mention, or I just flat out missed it, that they did not mention that Ted Bundy actually had a class at one point with Linda Ann Healy. Now, in circles where this sort of thing is common chatter, even prior to this documentary, of course, I feel as though it's kind of, I won't say heavily debated because it doesn't come up that often. It's kind of always written off as sort of a non-issue. But I think, though, that in the grand scheme of this type of documentary, I think it would have been worth at least a quick mention, because the way they glossed over it sort of, I feel, can be misleading to the degree that one could pretty easily think that she was just, somebody else that he'd never had contact with before at all. Now, it is not, to my knowledge, really known information, whether that was just coincidence or whether perhaps he had been watching her. But again, I mean, just if nothing else, for the sake of uh, the contemplation of the viewer, perhaps to be able to sort of form their own opinions, because why are we even watching a lot of true crime stuff if not to form our own opinions about what happened or certain circumstances, because, of course, not everything always comes to light, and there are little things that we don't know or will never know. And I think part of the fun with watching and experiencing and, immersing yourself into something like true crime is your ability to just sort of look at it critically and think, like, oh, was this a connection? Did this have anything to do with this? Sort of those unanswered questions that we have that we can sit back and just kind of formulate our own little opinions or theories about it. For me, that's a lot of the appeal for true crime are some of the little unknown factors in an otherwise extremely well-covered case. Excuse me, I'm still getting kind of over this plague that was running rampant here the last couple of weeks. But yes, I think that definitely overall, I thought it was a very good documentary. I think it was well done. I think it was. I've seen a lot of articles claiming that it's glorifying Ted Bundy or condoning what he did. And one thing that I can readily say for myself, if not for the bulk, at least, of the whole true crime fandom, if you want to call it that, is that when we are fascinated by these people and by these cases, I think it goes without saying that enjoying researching a topic and gaining knowledge about it does not mean that you're saying this is a good thing that happened. You would certainly never go to for instance, a World War II historian who knows basically everything that there is to know about the Nazis and tell them, oh, well, if you are so interested in this, you must be a Nazi yourself. Because it's ridiculous. I will totally sound like a bitter hipster here for a minute. There's a lot with yet another revolution, mind you, because this happens every so often, with Ted Bundy in particular, where it sort of something happens and it comes into pop culture, and it usually is related to a movie or a new book, more often than not a movie. In fact, the same year, if memory serves, that Mark Harmon was voted People's Sexiest Man Alive, he portrayed Ted Bundy in a movie called The Deliberate Stranger. I always start to call it Stranger Beside Me. Sorry. The Deliberate Stranger. And every time it happens, there's always the cries of, you're romanticizing him, you're glorifying him, you're doing this, you're doing that. I would like to just take a second to remind everybody that every time Ted Bundy rolls back up into the spotlight, we are reminded again of his victims and and their families. Another thing that I was incredibly surprised about that was not mentioned. Well, okay, I'm just gonna back it up and be a little more honest. I was surprised. I can't say incredibly surprised because it's not super commonly known information, but the two victims who were taken at Lake Sammamish, their families, those two girls, their families didn't get to have proper funerals or proper burials for their daughters, and their young ones that were lost, because, and the long and the short of it, this is not what this is about, so I'm just gonna scoot through this real quick, but the long and the short of it is there was basically a mistake made within the police departments who had the remains of those two ladies. A mistake was made and the remains were essentially lost. There's a whole thing that's a different conversation. And things like that I think bear mentioning. It's, in cases like that where it's already bad enough that these families have had to bury their children, now you have a situation where they don't even get the remains back after they're no longer needed for evidence. Yeah, that's brutal. So I get off topic, I apologize, but here's the thing. I'm seeing a lot of obviously polarizing opinions online, which is bound to happen. But here's the thing. more people than you realize are heavily into true crime. It's not new, it's not unusual. If it was, there wouldn't be 8 million shows, there wouldn't be, God, literally hundreds of episodes of things like Forensic Files, and shows like Criminal Minds would not be a thing. So I think that it's interesting when one of the more well-known cases sort of makes it back into the spotlight for whatever reason, because there's so much derision that happens, I feel like. I feel like right now my entire timeline is a whole lot of, oh my God, Ted Bundy, he's so beautiful and he's so hot and he's this and he's that. And then the other side of it is a whole lot of, oh my God, you guys are glorifying a killer. What are you doing? You know he killed people, right? And it kind of baffles me because as somebody, here's the thing, true crime has always been a fascination for people, literally always. It's not new, it's not weird, it's not anything except another little interest. Oftentimes it kind of falls back into the shadows and is more of a niche interest, admittedly. But here's the thing, there's a lot of people that you know that you've probably never realized were into this stuff until something like this happens, something big, something that really gets everybody talking about it. Because I'll tell you, I've barely been able to go anywhere in the last couple of weeks without hearing somebody talk about Ted Bundy. And here's the bitter hipster part. Admittedly, of all the things that have been a seriously sort of not super common interest of mine that has suddenly had its big old moment in the sun, this is the fucking weirdest one, I'm here to tell you. So in my shop, I have a lot of paintings that I have done, mostly for my own amusement, really. And among them are 2 paintings of Ted Bundy. And I get clients in all the time and they ask, oh, who did these paintings? And I tell them, oh, I did. And so it's about 50-50. Some people will look right up and start naming, just listing off these serial killers as they're going down the wall that I have the bulk of them on. And, I'll get, oh, well, there's John Wayne Gacy, and there's Richard Ramirez, and a lot of people get to Albert Fish, and they're like, oh, what's this one? So it's cool because it kind of opens up this dialogue, and it's kind of surprised me since I started openly displaying those specific paintings, how many people are more knowledgeable about it than you would anticipate, and more interested in it than you would have maybe previously thought. It surprises me. And when people are like, oh, these are really good paintings, who are they? Who are these people? And I start to tell them, there's a couple of the names that don't ring any bells, and people just kind of give me the deer in the headlights look, like my Carl Panzram painting. Not a common one. A lot of people are not familiar with him, especially not just on site from a painting. It's also a painting I did, so let's not act like it's portrait quality shit here. But one thing I will tell you is John Wayne Gacy, Richard Ramirez, and Ted Bundy are the ones that people immediately, they know those names, with very few exceptions. And those are the people that always surprise me. I'm like, how have you made it to be old enough to come talk to me about a piercing and you haven't heard one of these names? Which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. It just kind of always surprises me, because the bulk of the people that I deal with in a day, personally, like, they know who these people are because we have similar interests, or because I have already done a lot of time, like, talking to them about it. And I hesitate to say educating them about it, because again, that goes back to, like, me sounding like a sort of self-glorified expert of some variety, which again, I'm not, but it's an interest of mine, so I know a fair bit about it. And there's 2 reactions with the people who recognize these names. They either immediately start gushing about, oh man, I find serial killers crazy interesting. I think it's super cool. Like, these are really neat paintings. I really like your work, And then usually we'll sit there and just kind of BS back and forth about serial killers and things like that. When I say true crime in this context, I'm largely referring to serial killers. I also have an interest in cult leaders, but true crime, of course, is very much an all-encompassing term. I personally am not really terribly fascinated by or interested in mass murderers or any of that. I've always really found the most interest in serial killers and with a side of cult leaders. But yeah, so there's either the, oh my god, I love this stuff, this is so cool response, or there's the, I've literally, and I'm not even kidding you, I've actually had people look me dead in the face and go, you know he killed people, right? And I'm going to be honest with you, because it is typically clients that I'm dealing with when this conversation comes up, because again, these are displayed in my lobby at my shop, I always have to pause for a second to remember that as awkward a question as they just asked me, I can't really afford to be rude to them. And it's not because I'm like immediately upset and want to be rude to them. It's just because what kind of a question is that? I find it moderately insulting that someone thinks that I would put the sometimes surprising amount of time into these paintings without having any idea who it is that I'm painting. And I've gotten, well, why are you glorifying them like that? So here's the thing. If I were out, and I'm not damning anyone who's doing this, to be super clear. If you've got the skills and you've got the means, do you. Feed your babies. But I feel like this is not a situation where I am running an art gallery in here and getting paid $1,000 a pop for these paintings and making all this money off these guys and not, like, I've literally sold like 2 of my serial killer paintings, and one of them was my first Ted Bundy painting to a very dear friend of mine who frankly loved that painting just about as much as I do. And subsequently that one I actually have made into a poster print that now sits in my shop. In terms of romanticizing or glorifying serial killers, in particular Ted Bundy, because that's kind of the purpose of the video right now, is discussing Ted Bundy in recent media. I feel as though that's a slippery slope. Because I've seen just literally hateful comments passed back and forth between people online right now over this. I've seen, all of the, well, you're not special because everybody loves true crime, and I get it, I get the sentiment. I really do. I always prefer people to just be into what they're into, regardless of the connotations of it. Like, if you personally are not harming anyone, do you? But I don't think that telling an accurate story should be considered glorifying or romanticizing. And in the case of the documentary, I thought that the research was well done. Like I said, a couple things I was a little surprised didn't make the cut for 4 hours, but stellar introductory to Ted Bundy. As far as the movie goes, I think it serves people to remember that historically, the movies that we have made regarding Ted Bundy have had these notoriously good-looking men or these sexy guys playing him. And part of that is because, unibrow notwithstanding, the man wasn't an eyesore, okay? And in particular, the forthcoming movie is based on a screenplay written from the perspective of his girlfriend, Liz, who goes through this very human struggle of, I don't want to believe that this person that I love very much and that I think loves me is capable of this awful, awful behavior, but kind of starting to understand, there's little things starting to add up and tie together, and they're not so little things anymore. And I think that if you had just sort of this inkling that maybe someone you love was out doing awful things, I don't think that you can just hit a switch that says, I don't love this person anymore, and I no longer feel fondness at all for this person, until you are convinced that, yes, the things that they're saying he did, or she, whatever the case may be. So, in terms of it being a quote-unquote romanticized view of Ted Bundy, that's kind of a necessary part to telling the story that they are telling. So on behalf of people everywhere who are into this sort of thing, maybe look at what you're calling romanticizing before you start saying, like, it's a terrible thing. Yeah, he's probably going to be fairly romanticized in the film because it's being told from the perspective of a romantic partner of his. So that's kind of how that works. That's not to say that anyone involved with the production of the documentary or the movie, or even anyone who is excited to watch the documentary or the movie, is in any way condoning Ted Bundy's actions. And I think it is completely ignorant, in my opinion, to assume that an interest in something turns into this is completely okay and this is acceptable behavior. That's what I'm saying when I say I'm interested in this. Furthermore, excuse me, I feel like the mudslinging is already a little bit out of control, because one thing I will tell you is, and this goes back to the sounding like a bitter hipster thing, I have, over the course of my life, and I have basically my entire life been very heavily into true crime, in all facets, until I really sort of funneled it down to what really caught my eye. I have been told some absolutely abysmal things over it. And there are a lot of people that you probably know who are much more into this sort of thing than you might think. Because a lot of these people feel the need to sort of tuck it away and hide this, dirty little secret that they have this fascination with this sort of thing. And as far as I'm concerned, I mean, it's not really a great deal different than somebody who has a very intense fondness for watching documentaries about literally anything else. You could have a friend who's obsessed with watching oceanography documentaries. It's a thing that they are interested in. What really baffles me right now is that many of the same people who are posting and commenting about you need to stop saying that you're attracted to Ted Bundy because he did terrible things are the same people who are really pushing for acceptance for everyone, regardless of who they're attracted to, because they can't help it. So even by simply saying, I think that this was a good-looking man, that in no way means I think that what he was doing was okay. Now, there are those fangirls out there, and it actually irritates me when somebody uses that term on me, because I don't consider myself a Bundy fangirl by any means. Because when I say fangirls, what I mean are, the types of girls who either maybe don't have a full understanding of the actual atrocities that Ted Bundy committed, who are just obsessive, who I think really sort of have in their head that, oh, well, if Ted Bundy were alive, or if I were alive back then, he wouldn't have done it to me. Stop. You're just as good as the next pretty girl. Calm down. He'd have done it to you too. And I feel like there's kind of this attitude right now where it's either super edgy to be a Bundy file all of a sudden, or where, oh my God, you guys know he killed people, right? And it's just kind of like, it's kind of like anything else. I get that right now it is kind of hard for anybody to escape. Your friends, your coworkers, somebody you know is excited about this. Somebody you know is talking about this. I'm here to tell you, if they're at the point that they are watching documentaries and things like that, they know to some degree what Ted Bundy did. They don't need you to tell them, okay? I don't need you to tell me that Ted Bundy killed people, because A, I know, B, I have not yet had a person make a comment like that to me that I wasn't pretty reasonably sure that I knew a lot more about this particular topic than they do. So, ultimately, I'm kind of pleading on the live and let live side here, ironically. Maybe you have some weird interests that everybody else thinks is fucking weird. So give it a rest. If you are not about the Ted Bundy life, tell your friends that are yapping at you about it that you really don't care. And then leave it alone. Like, this literally, when I say polarizing, I'm watching conversations happen on my news feed and listening to conversations happen in person that are literally bordering on like 2016 politically angry level conversations that don't need to be happening. For all of you who are reminding us that, oh my God, he killed people, he's been dead since 1989. Nothing that any of us say or do is going to change that. He was found guilty of his crimes. He was put to death for his crimes. It is over. However, that whole learn from your past or you're doomed to repeat it, everyone who's freaking out about glorifying Ted Bundy, I think that it might behoove you, if you are willing, of course, I'm not here to tell you how to live your life, it might interest you, I guess I should say, it might interest you to look into everything that we actually learned from Ted Bundy throughout the FBI interviews and things like that. A lot of our profiling techniques and things like that we use right now to catch people like Ted Bundy, we picked up a lot of that from Ted Bundy. So I feel as though if the FBI found him interesting enough to interview, I'm not sure how you can really fault the rest of us for being a little bit interested and a little invested in this story. Yeah, I guess that's it. Oh man, this went on so much longer than I meant it to, you guys. Sorry about that. But I guess really the bulk of it here that I'm saying is the documentary, well worth the watch in my opinion. Few things that I think were glossed over, and I think though that it's a really good starting point. I think that it will definitely give somebody sort of a taste of, especially, you know, somebody who might already be a little bit into true crime but kind of hasn't really found their specific like avenue in true crime yet that they're really interested in. Check it out, because it'll give you a good idea whether this is somebody you want to continue to research. If the documentary interests you at all, like I said, there's amazing books out there. There are other documentaries. There's a lot of information out there on Ted Bundy, and I think that anybody who was interested in the documentary should at least give it a shot. Check it out. See if you like it. You might love it and realize, oh, this is an interest of mine. You might watch it and go, ew, I don't like this. But I mean, it's worth checking out. At least give the first episode a shot. And certainly, I will tell people